Hi, so in today's video, we're going to continue to go through court documents filed by Prime Minister Andrew Holness in his application to the court to apply for leave to apply for judicial review of actions and decisions of the Integrity Commission. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Dionne Jackson-Miller. Stay tuned. So in my previous two videos, I went through the affidavit filed by Mr. Holness in which he sets out his version of what happened. All right. Today, I'm going to take you through the notice of application for court orders. These are the different things he's asking the court to do if he is successful and gets permission to apply for judicial review. So let's get into it. So he is asking for leave to apply for judicial review of a number of things. The failure and or refusal of the Director of Information and Complaints to act impartially, fairly, and independently to carry out his duty to examine the 2022 and 2023 statutory declarations of Mr. Holness. So if you remember, initially what happened was that Mr. Holness filed his 2021 declaration. That was referred for investigation. And then the Director of Investigation started to look beyond 2021. As a result, the Director of Information and Complaints, whose duty it is to look at the statutory declarations, said he hadn't started to look at the 2022 declaration because he was waiting for the investigation on the 2021 declaration to be completed, okay? So Mr. Holness is now asking for a review of the Director of Information and Complaints failure and or refusal to examine his 2022 and 2023 statutory declarations. He also wants review of the failure and or refusal of the Director of Information and Complaints and or the Integrity Commission to certify his 2021 and 2022 declarations and or to provide reasons for being unable to certify them, having regard to all the circumstances of the case, including that there is no statement of reasonable suspicion of corruption or an offense under the Integrity Commission Act. In addition, he says they made no recommendation or reference to the Director of Corruption Prosecution on the remaining matters in the report. In other words, the reference to the Director of Corruption Prosecutions was only in relation to the 4 bank accounts that had been left off the statutory declaration. Mr. Holness is saying none of the other issues that were being investigated were sent to her for a ruling. He wants review of their failure to observe the statutory scheme of the Integrity Commission Act in relation to their respective functions. Also of the decision of the Director of Investigation and the Integrity Commission to send the report to Parliament. Also, their decision to recommend that the 3 companies associated with Mr. Holness be referred to Tax Administration Jamaica and the Financial Investigations Division. Also, the decision to continue or keep the investigation for illicit enrichment open in relation to Mr. Holness's 2021 declaration, notwithstanding findings or conclusions that for the year 2021, there was negative net growth of 10.4 million, or that there is no unexplained growth. Also, he wants review of the decision to keep the investigation open in relation to his 2022 declaration, notwithstanding findings or conclusions that for that year, there was negative net growth of 5.3 million, or otherwise no unexplained growth. He also wants a review of the Director of Investigation's finding that Mr. Holness's lawful objection is a refusal to provide information which inhibited the Director's ability to make a comprehensive and final assessment of Mr. Holness's assets, liabilities, and income. He wants review of their failure to disclose the basis for the investigation apart from Section 14.5. Now, the document says of the Integrity Commission Act. That's an error. There is no 14.5 in the Integrity Commission Act. They mean the Corruption Prevention Act, where 14.5 is a section that deals with illicit enrichment. He wants review of their decision to proceed with the investigation on a basis other than Section 14.5. He wants review of what he calls the impermissible commingling of the relationship and or functions of and amongst the divisions of the Commission and the Commission, resulting in a conflict of interest and or abdication of duty on the part of the directors and the Commission. Let me just say this. So I'm reading from the court documents, obviously. Just remember, though, that what I'm reading is what Mr. Holness is claiming. We still have to see what the Integrity Commission is going to say, and then, of course, what the court will decide at the end of it. So just to give an example, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So when I say, for instance, that he wants review of the respondent's failure to observe the procedure laid down in the Integrity Commission Act for examining, initiating an investigation, and or certifying his statutory declarations, that is what he is claiming. The Integrity Commission is going to respond to see whether or not they agree or disagree with that claim, and then the judge will make a determination at some point. All right, so just want to be clear on that. He wants a review. He wants review of what he calls the refusal and or delay to examine his 2022 and 2023 declarations and or to certify his 2021 declaration, and he's calling it an arbitrary, unreasonable, irrational exercise of their duties. He wants a review of the Integrity Commission for what he calls failing to observe the provisions of the Integrity Commission Act in relation to the procedure for treating with or directing an investigation into the 2021 declaration. He wants a review into the Director of Investigation's failure to observe the statutory scheme of the Act, which includes Section 54(2) that required the termination of the investigation and to issue a report of its findings to the Commissioner through the Executive Director. He wants a review of the Director of Investigations and the Integrity Commission's failure to recommend and or issue a public exoneration of culpability when the first investigation into his 2021 declaration ended, as he's saying is required by Section 54(5). And he said they improperly included its details in the report that was sent to Parliament so that the benefit of exculpation is lost. Meaning he wasn't able to benefit from any material that was favorable to him. He wants a review into the Director of Investigation and the Integrity Commission's failure to recommend and or issue a public exoneration of culpability, having not formed any reasonable suspicion of corruption or offence under the Integrity Act. He wants a review of what he calls the misuse of private information of him and the companies by disclosing their private information in a manner that he says is prejudicial to their rights and interests. He wants a review of what he calls their failure and or refusal at notification that there was an investigation pursuant to the Section 14(5) dealing with illicit enrichment, and to communicate to Mr. Holness the wealth element of an illicit enrichment investigation. All right, some of these are very similar, so I'm not going to go through all of them. All right, I'll just show you the page so you can see how many there are. He wants a review of what he calls the Integrity Commission's misuse of the Integrity Commission Act to table a special report in Parliament and to make improper and unlawful recommendations to Parliament and or the Financial Investigations Division and the Tax Administration Department. He wants a review of the referral to Parliament for tabling of the matters in the report, except for the matters relating to the 4 accounts, because that was the matter in which the Direction of Corruption Prosecution said there should be no charges. He wants a review of what he calls their unlawful and unfair expansion of the investigation from his 2021 declaration to include the 2019, 2020, 2022 and 2023 declarations and subsequently submission for tabling in Parliament. He wants a review of the findings, conclusions, decisions and or recommendations made in relation to himself and the 3 companies by the Director of Investigation contained in the investigation report. He wants a review of the findings and or conclusion that there's a potential conflict of interest between him and Norman Brown. He wants a review of what he calls their acts and or decisions to consider irrelevant facts and or to refuse to consider relevant facts in carrying out their investigation, preparing, considering and submitting the reports for tabling. And he wants a review of what he calls their usurping of the functions of the court in lifting the corporate veil, and in the approach and procedure adopted, the analysis, recommendations and conclusions in relation to the offence of illicit enrichment. And he's talking here about the fact that the Director of Investigation said that because Mr. Holness's affairs, as well as the affairs of the company Imperium, which is wholly owned by him, were so intertwined that he had to consider them both together. Mr. Holness wants a review of that decision. So this is what he wants. He wants what is called an order of certiorari, quashing the report and the findings and recommendations of the Director of Investigation and or the Integrity Commission. I'm not going to go through all of these because they're very similar. What he's asking for is an order to quash the report and the findings and recommendations of the report on various bases. All right? So I'm going to go down now. He also wants what is called an order of mandamus. This is an order that says from the court that says you have to do something. So he wants an order compelling the Director of Information and Complaints to examine his 2022 and 2023 statutory declaration. He wants an order compelling the Director of Investigation to recommend to the Integrity Commission that he should be exonerated of culpability in relation to the 2021 and 2022 declarations. He wants a declaration that the submission of the reports to Parliament, except for matters relating to the 4 accounts, was unlawful and or illegal. He wants a declaration that, having regard to the fact that there was no statement or no statement of reasonable suspicion of corruption in relation to the matters referred to Parliament in the report and the special report, and there being no reference to the Director of Corruption Prosecution, he wants a declaration that in those circumstances the Integrity Commission was wrong to send the reports to Parliament for tabling. Now the next few points I'm going to read, this is what I was referring to in the first video when I said I was startled at some of what was being requested. What we have here is a Prime Minister, the head of government, a legislator, asking for the dismantling, essentially, of a significant part of the legislative, the laws that are put in place to try to prevent corruption in the public sector. So let me tell you what I mean. He's asking for a declaration striking down the provisions of the Integrity Commission Act, given what he calls a lack of fairness, impartiality, and independence in the exercise of the functions of the divisions and the commission as presently structured. So he's saying here that he believes that the commission isn't acting with fairness, impartiality, and independence, and as a result, he wants a law struck down. He's also asking for a declaration that Section 14(5) of the Corruption Prevention Act is unconstitutional. That is a section that deals with illicit enrichment in relation to public servants, to call them to account or to create a criminal offense, perhaps I should say, if they have assets that are disproportionate to their lawful earnings. In other words, if they have a bag of things and their salary or their other earnings can't justify the expense of what it is they own, and they can't give a satisfactory explanation as to how it is they have those assets. The Prime Minister wants that section of the Corruption Prevention Act struck down. He says it breaches the presumption of innocence. He says it imposes a reverse burden, a reverse onus. What that means is that as part of the process of proving the offense of illicit enrichment is that you, the person suspected of illicit enrichment, have to provide a satisfactory explanation as to how you have the assets, as to how you could afford the assets, or you could be guilty of the offense. So that's what's called a reverse burden. That is not just about the prosecution proving anything. In this case, you have to prove something as well if you're to defend yourself. A reverse burden is not the norm, but it is not unusual either in certain types of legislation that are put in to fight different types of crime. Another time we can talk more about that. He also wants a section struck down saying it breaches his due process rights. He wants a declaration that the commission infringed his and the company's rights to fair procedures or natural justice and due process because of what he calls the impermissible intermingling of or lack of fairness, impartiality, and independence of the functions of the Director of Information and Complaints, the Director of Investigation, and the Integrity Commission. He wants a declaration that the Director of Investigation and the Integrity Commission acted ultra vires the law, meaning outside their powers, in referring the matter in relation to two of the companies for investigation to the Financial Investigation Division. He wants a declaration or order that by disclosing the contents or subject matter of its investigation, including private information of him and the companies, and by referring it to the Financial Investigation Division, that the Director of Investigation and the Commission breached his and the company's reasonable expectation of privacy as guaranteed by the Constitution. He wants a declaration that they were entitled to notice of the decision or to a hearing before the recommendation of the Director of Investigation was accepted, including whether to send the report to Parliament, to Tax Admin, or to the Financial Investigation Division. He wants a declaration that the Director of Investigation and the Integrity Commission acted in breach of natural justice and or the Constitution, since they were entitled, him and the companies, were entitled to a hearing before recommendations were made that were adverse to their rights and interests. He wants an order that the investigation by any competent authority should end, and or that it would be unfair to continue the investigation in all the circumstances of this case. So he's asking for any investigation that may now be underway, we don't know, by the Financial Investigation Division and or Tax Administration Division, or indeed any other law enforcement agency or investigation agency. He's asking for an order that those investigations come to an end. He's also asking for a declaration and or an order setting aside the investigation report and the special report on the basis that the Director of Investigation and the Integrity Commission usurped the functions of the court by unlawfully piercing the corporate veil. He wants a declaration that the process used by the Director of Investigation in conducting his investigation was unfair, unreasonable, and irrational. He wants a declaration that Mr. Holness's legitimate expectations that the Director of Investigation would have observed the principles of natural justice and procedural fairness in conducting the investigation, he's saying those principles were breached. He wants a declaration that the investigation, findings, conclusions, and or recommendations made in relation to the applicants by the Director of Investigation in the investigation report, he's saying those findings, conclusions, and recommendations were made in breach of the principles of natural justice and procedural fairness. He's asking the court to make that declaration. Okay, so the document then goes through the grounds on which those orders are being sought, and I'm not going to go through those. It's basically background, saying, for instance, he is the Prime Minister, the various companies are limited liability companies, the directors are public servant, and so on. So I'm not public servants and so on. I'm not going to go through all of that. So what happens in the rest of the document is that the documents speak about various areas in which they say there were breaches: natural justice, procedural fairness, constitutional breaches, and some more. So in my next and final video on this set of court documents, I'll tell you what is said in relation to those various areas. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Dionne. I'll see you next time.